Today, the Woodhull Freedom Foundation commemorates the birthday of its namesake and its inspiration, Victoria Woodhull, by releasing the long-awaited report on the state of sexual freedom in the United States. The report has been designed to help educate the public on matters of sexual freedom and expression and to help set a new tone for the discussion of these issues in the public discourse. We hope to begin discussing sexual freedom as a fundamental human right. And by releasing this comprehensive report, we hope to advance the dialogue on matters of human sexuality and to encourage the public, along with the media, to approach individual sexuality as a civil liberty, a fundamental human right that cannot and should not be abridged. The courts and lawmakers have started to recognize this important evolution in sexual freedoms. They've begun to discuss sexuality in terms of the right to privacy and due process and basic human liberty. We've seen the repeal of all of the nation's sodomy laws through the Lawrence versus Texas case at the United States Supreme Court. More recently, we've seen the California Supreme Court uphold same-sex marriage in the context of equal protection and constitutional rights. And just a few days ago, we saw the appellate court in Florida invalidate the last standing ban on gay adoption. So we're making progress. Judicial recognition of sexual freedom is on the rise, but there's a lot of work to be done. Sexual discrimination still exists against individuals who choose an alternative lifestyle, both by the government and by their employers and their fellow citizens. So the report calls attention to these issues and identifies the matters that need additional attention. The Foundation is committed to using what we call a transpartisan approach to change the tenor of how we address sexual issues and how they're discussed in public. We want to encourage public discussion of these issues with both dignity and compassion. Woodhull is not interested in playing politics with something so important to our fundamental nature as human sexuality. We seek an inclusive and tolerant and humanistic approach to these flashpoint issues to achieve a greater understanding of the many shades and flavors of human sexuality that exist in civilized society. We've had presentations all day long and have demonstrated that we can have a productive dialogue about sexual freedom without embarrassment, shame, or prejudice. We want to see more of these discussions occur throughout the country with the same level of candor and productivity. The report that we're releasing today includes many viewpoints from different authors, from academics to attorneys to activists. The differing viewpoints in the report exemplify the inclusive approach that the Foundation wishes to take in discussing sexual freedom as a human right. The report addresses a host of complicated issues, from teen sexting to the impact of class and race on sexuality to prosecuting pornography. It considers the virtues of recreational sex, the difficulties with labeling people based on their gender identity or their gender orientation. There is often no right or wrong answer when discussing these sensitive, erotic issues. Instead, there are many different answers in many different circumstances. But if we can talk about sex in a reasoned, logical way, we can advance the discussion and continue the evolution towards accepting sexual freedom as a fundamental human right. Included in the report is a survey of various individuals asking them what they believe is the most important issue in sexual freedom. This was included to help direct the future efforts of the Foundation and assist in driving the discussion to the most relevant and productive direction. Elizabeth Wood, who was instrumental in preparing the survey and this part of the report, is here to tell you more about the survey and the results that we obtained. So at this point, I'll turn it over to Elizabeth, who will say a few words about that portion of the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Larry. And thank you all for being here as we release this report. I'm excited to see what the report looks like next year. In addition to the expert assessments that make up the chapters of the Woodhull Freedom Foundation Sexual Freedom Report, we conducted some exploratory research between December 2009 and February 2010, and I want to tell you a little bit about that one portion of what we did. As Larry said, the purpose of the research was twofold. We wanted to provide some personal stories and illustrations that we could use in writing the report, but we also wanted a guide to set the future research agenda for the Woodhull Freedom Foundation. We distributed an online questionnaire to activists, advocates, and academics who we knew were involved already in the cause of sexual freedom. And then we encouraged them to circulate a link to the survey, to the questionnaire, on their listservs and via their social networks. The questionnaire itself, if you haven't already seen it and if you didn't answer it, is in the appendix of the report. This means that the questionnaire served a third function by creating a moment of contact between Woodhull and many other organizations and individuals making new connections within the growing sexual freedom movement. We received 298 responses, 292 of which were complete enough to be useful. We can't tell you what the response rate was because we have no idea, given social media, how many people actually received the link. But I can tell you about a couple of notable findings. The first section of the survey presented a list of 7 broad areas of sexual freedom concern and asked respondents to identify as many as they wanted that they considered to be among the most important issues that the movement needed to address. These broad areas are represented in the chapters of the report, and they are individual freedoms, family and relationship freedoms, obscenity, commercial sex, sexuality, education and information, sexual health, and reproductive freedom. One interesting finding is that most respondents felt that the majority of these issues were among the most important that the movement needed to address. 4 of the 7 areas, reproductive freedom, sexual education, relationship and family freedoms, and individual freedoms, were identified as among the most important by more than 70% of the respondents. Even regarding the 2 least commonly selected areas, commercial sex and obscenity, fully half of the respondents identified these as being among the most important for the movement. So clearly, people who care about sexual freedom, and who are often people who've devoted much of their time and work to improving conditions in one specific area, see that all areas of concern are truly important if we're going to establish sexual freedom as a fundamental human right. When we asked people to identify in their own words up to 3 specific issues related to sexual freedom that were of great importance to them, their issues were spread across all these categories, but the 3 categories with the most responses were individual freedoms, which contained about 31% of the responses that we received, sexuality, education, and information with 17%, and family and relationship freedoms, which represented about 15% of the individual issues. When we asked people to reflect on whether things had been getting better or worse over the previous 5 years, and then to look just back at 1 year and tell us if things were better or worse, people with concerns about sexual education showed the most optimism about recent change. This is going to sound a little weird. It's going to sound like least worst or least bad. While 57% of those sharing concerns in the area of sexual education had thought the situation had generally deteriorated over the past 5 years, only 20% felt that way about the last year. Respondents sharing sexual health concerns were the most likely to say things had gotten worse over the past 5 years. 70% of them said that. And those sharing concerns about relationship and family freedoms were the most likely to say that things had actually gotten better over the past 5 years. 45% of people who shared those concerns thought that things had got better over the past 5 years. In fact, that category, family and relationship freedoms, was the only category where a greater number of people said things were getting better than said things were getting worse. So respondents recognize the importance of victories like those over adoption rights, state marriage decisions, and things like that as moving us forward in that area, despite the fact that we have very large battles yet to win at the federal level. We had 2 sections of the questionnaire that invited open-ended responses. One of those asked for stories that illustrated the respondents' concerns about sexual freedom personally, and the other asked for thoughts about the best remedies and strategies for addressing sexual freedom concerns. We received over 120 such stories and suggestions. Many were quite detailed and told very painful stories about the suffering that comes from restrictions on sexual freedom. We're still mining all that data, but I can tell you that in terms of remedies, many people did in fact identify legislative and judicial action as the most important strategy to pursue, but many others talked about the need for expanding sexuality education across the life course, and many talked about the cultural changes that we need to achieve in order to make legal freedoms meaningful. So on behalf of Woodhull Freedom Foundation, I'd like to thank everybody who responded to our questions, We look forward to continuing to use this information as we continue to affirm sexual freedom as a fundamental human right. Thank you.
Thank you for those insights, Elizabeth. The report is now public and will be made available to you as you turn in your badges and exit today. We're very happy that you all have attended. That wraps up our introduction of the report. If any members of the press have any questions about the report or the policies or intentions of Woodhull, we're welcome to answer those questions at this point. Any questions?
I thought we were supposed to wear our badges out on the metro.
We're going to recycle. We've decided that recycling takes precedence. Any questions from the press? Yes.
I was wondering if anyone could speak to the elements of what that you as a foundation found most disturbing from the data you collected.
What was the question?
The question was, could any of us address the elements that we found most disturbing in the report from the data that was collected? I think that a lot of the data is still being analyzed. Is there anything that you want to address from that, Elizabeth?
I want to make clear that the questionnaire data is one small portion of the report. Much of the report comes from expert assessments that are compiled into the chapters. And I will tell you, I have not yet read the full report, so I'm not sure what is among the most disturbing in there. I can tell you that in terms of the very small questionnaire, which is, and I want to be clear about this too, this is certainly not a scientifically conducted survey, this is exploratory research. One of the things that disturbed me in looking at that information was the degree of pain and suffering that people experience on a regular day-to-day basis. Now, it's not that I was unaware of that, but it's made all the more clear when you see it communicated directly to you, and when it's in an anonymous form, people will tell you things that they wouldn't necessarily say otherwise. So I found those stories disturbing in some instances. Also, the degree of overall discontent. Again, not surprising, but certainly disturbing. In terms of the content of the chapters of the report, I can't speak very much to those. Perhaps Ricky could or somebody else. We have several authors in the room. I'm not sure if any of you would like to speak.
Do we have any other questions from members of the media before we wrap up our press conference? Well, I would like to again thank everybody for coming, and I hope that you will celebrate Sexual Freedom Day in the method that you find most fitting, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you all for coming.